US China tensions dominate global news headlines. However, a recent prisoner swap brought good news that uplifted many who had been working behind the scenes to secure the freedom of some people. An agreement on prison swap was reached between President Biden and President Xi Jinping during the latest APEC summit in Peru. Among those who were allowed to come to the United States is Aisha Mamet, a 73-year-old Uyghur from Xinjiang, who's the mother of Nury Turkel, a high-profile Uyghur-American activist, a former chair of the U.S. Congressional Commission on International Religious Freedom, and a fellow at Hudson Institute. This is a two-part interview with Nury Turkel, and for the first part today, Nury shares his family's journey. Well, Nury, please share with our audience the news, the incredible news about your family reunion.
Thank you very much, Wenchi, for having me on your program. As many of the people who follow my work, read my book, listened to my congressional testimonies, and read my op-eds in the last, I don't know how many years, advocating for my parents. I never thought in my life that I would see my mom in such a ceremonial way, in such a dignified way. I was notified 3 days prior to my mom's arrival. It was a late night. I missed a call and called back, and it was a cell phone conversation. I still could not believe what I heard. It was about there's some positive development that I would need to be prepared to fly down to a U.S. government facility. And, as they should, the message was cautiously optimistic. I was very pleased. Frankly speaking, I could not sleep. I ran upstairs to the third floor to wake up my wife, and we hugged and wept. And then I told my son, "You're going to meet your grandma for the first time soon." And he gets so emotional. There's a picture right on my shoulder over there from my law school graduation. That Ed Wong's New York Times piece has a picture of it. When my son was 4 years old, he stood there and asked me who they were. I told him grandparents, and the following question is, how come I don't meet them? What can you say? He was 4 years old. How do you explain that painful abnormality that myself and my family enduring was something I could not explain to 4 years old. This whole family suffering started actually when I was born. My mother delivered me in a re-education camp during the height of the Cultural Revolution.
What year was that?
It was 1970, the height of the Cultural Revolution. So my mother was taken into the re-education camp, and my father was sent to labor camp, performing agricultural labor, which is much like what is happening today that caught the attention of the United States government. After finishing my secondary and high school education, I came to the United States. It was 29 years ago. So from the time that I left the mainland, I was only able to spend 11 months with my late father and my mother, who brought me to this world under such extraordinary circumstances. So because of that upbringing, because of that experience that my mom and I endured early on, we have a very special bond. I don't know, because of that bond was identified by the leadership in Beijing. They have targeted my mom, taking her passport away along with my dad's. And then starting 2009, at the outset of the Obama administration, I start contacting people. I started campaigning for my parents. So fast forward, in the following years, my parents were never told why they cannot travel to, outside of the country. They were subject to domestic travel restriction, and things got really, really bad.
So even domestic, there was restriction on their
Yes,
travel.
yes, yes. That made it even more difficult. They often ask me if I could help them to find out if there's anything that they have done intentionally, unintentionally, preventing them to even move around within the region, within the China proper. This whole struggle taken to new level when I was appointed by then Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, to serve in a government role. Shortly after my appointment, there was a message that I shouldn't be serving in the US government. I should be resigning immediately. And then late in 2021, I get sanctioned by Beijing for my work in the U.S. government.
And that was on international religious freedom?
Yeah, U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. It was part of the response to the Global sanction that President Biden imposed on four senior Chinese officials who are responsible for the atrocities committed against the Uyghur people. That also coincided with the timing of the Biden administration's formal announcement of diplomatic boycott of the upcoming Winter Olympics. On top of that, around that time, President Biden signed a very significant legislation called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that I worked so hard along with.
Be very hard to get it passed.
Yeah, very. I was expecting that somehow there will be a retaliation. And I thought that it will be mainly keeping my parents away from me with the wishful thinking that I will just be quiet. I think there was a miscalculation that sanctioning and continue to mistreat and abuse my parents actually emboldened me. And then something else also happened in early 2022 that I lost my father. I was in a official trip to a Central Asian country, Uzbekistan. My wife called and I was told that dad passed away. I was in the same time zone, literally in the same distance from Washington to New York, and yet I could not travel because I've been sanctioned. It was hurtful. I spent the whole night weeping, crying, and writing eulogy. I thought that the Chinese will show some humanity and mercy to let my widowed mother to go, and that didn't happen. And then late last year, on the eve of the Woodside Summit,
That was during APEC when Xi Jinping visited the United States.
precisely, that was the breaking point. So before that meeting, a few months prior, I had a chance to meet with President Biden. I made a case directly to him, and then I had a chance to speak with National Security Jake Sullivan. I was pleasantly surprised. Actually, I was very grateful that President Biden agreed to raise it directly with Xi Jinping. That was the first time. And then this year, the Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, the ambassador, continue their own efforts. And I was regularly kept in the loop. And every time when I asked, cabinet secretaries visiting Beijing, that includes Commerce Secretary Raimondo, raised my mother's case directly with her counterpart. And others in the senior level also raised the case, or at least pass on the message to the Chinese. So there is a whole of government approach to make it clear to the Chinese that this is a top priority for the Biden administration, which I'm eternally grateful.
Yes.
So fast forward, and this after the election, there's another APEC coming up. I really did not expect that President Biden would raise it again with Xi Jinping.
And this was, it was specifically on the side of APEC in Peru.
President Biden's last meeting with Xi Jinping. I still don't have the details, and it's not really important, what happened, what being said. But what is important is that shortly after the summit, I start seeing some movement. The way that the Chinese security officials interacting with my mom, somewhat different,
How were they different?
friendlier, nicer.
Did you have a sense that something might happen?
I heard my mom was also notified. So she asked me, look, why the authorities told her to be ready for AM flight to Beijing in the morning. It was less than 24 hours. And I essentially said, just follow the instruction, do as they say.
Was she informed that she was coming for a visit or she had to leave the country?
She was told that she will be taken to Beijing next morning.
There wasn't anything about meeting you in the US.
Everybody was kind of both sides, our side and theirs, until the wheels is up. No one,
Very cautious.
as you read in the news, no one, myself, my mom, no one in my family, even remotely aware of the complication of that exchange. So this is like a cinematic scene for me. I was on my way to Dulles Airport. I got a phone call from a DC number. And on the other side, a diplomat said, somebody wants to talk to you. And then it was mom. This was the time that the airplane was taxiing about to take off. So it was a relief. When my mom was on the phone, we could not even talk.
Yeah.
There's no proper word because you need to wait for 20 years. I don't know where my patience even come from. I don't know how she was able to keep it all together. She was always upbeat, hopeful. The diplomats who traveled with me, Ambassador Burns, who greeted my mom on the tarmac, all were impressed by her, how dignified that she held herself. No screaming, no crying. I mean, of course, she cried after the plane took off, and she also got very emotional when she saw Ambassador Burns. Also, another heartfelt aspect of this whole transfer. My mom is not a U.S. citizen, and there are other U.S. citizens, and yet our president called to say welcome home, and Secretary Blinken calling me by my name and calling my mother by her first name, as if that we all known each other. The way that she was received on the tarmac, it was just remarkable. A senior diplomat from the hostage affairs office walked her down the stairs, and at the bottom of the stairs there was a commander in uniform greeting her. The whole experience is something that I used to see in the movies. And I'm so impressed that it was such a well orchestrated, well planned, well executed operation. And my mom happened to be a part of that operations. We've been praying for this day. I am just one of the luckiest one, perhaps the luckiest one. There are countless others who don't even know where their loved ones are. Something that people cannot crush in me is the hope. I always believe that the hope is the best thing that I have. It's my biggest and most potent weapon. There's nothing that stops me from being hopeful. The minute that I stop being hopeful, that would be the end of my endeavors. If anyone who has a family either subject to exit ban or locked up need to be reminded that perseverance, keeping the pressure on our policymakers, decision makers, really at the end makes a difference. When you look at the type of people that Chinese government managed to took back, and the type of people that our government managed to bring home, it's really different weight. The Chinese got a fugitive, apparently based on the reporting, senior MSS official, and then his cohort, and then the other person was committing very serious kind of a creepy crime. So they got four. We got three wrongfully imprisoned Americans plus three Uyghurs. That's what makes this case so unique, and also good example to countries that have a sizable Uyghur population with a history of enforced separation or enforced disappearances, to look into the mirror to say, look, when President Biden was about to leave the White House, he can pull this off. Maybe he can borrow some pages from this playbook. This makes me so proud of our country. We're in a transition period. President Biden is in the process of wrapping up. This is a very sensitive negotiation.
Yes, of course.
Adding non-US citizens and the American citizen swap handled by the State Department, to me, it's quite remarkable. And it's a good case study for other liberal democracies to start taking care of their own citizens.
This has been a special episode of Zoom In, Zoom Out. Be sure to tune in for the second part of this conversation, where we discuss the world's response. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee,
We make the news.
Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.